Hi folks, welcome to another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. My name is Mike Dobbs. I'm the managing editor for Reminder Publishing, and it's my privilege to interview Carlos Gonzalez, our state rep here from Springfield, here in our studios. Thanks very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the work that you have done for the great city of Springfield when it comes to journalism.
Well, thank you, Carlos. Carlos is, by the way, full disclosure, my state rep. So yes, you're going to get my vote the next time for saying something nice to me. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so Carlos has been serving in the State House for a number of years now, but right now for this session, you are the chair of the Black and Latino Caucus for the General Court of Massachusetts. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What interested me about the caucus is that it is probably one of the few bodies within the legislature that has a really dominant number of people from Western Massachusetts. Because besides yourself, Representative Jose Tosado, Representative Bud Williams, and Representative Aaron Vega are all members of the caucus. There's 13 members of the caucus. So we have 4 people from Western Massachusetts in the caucus. What interests me about the work that you guys are doing is that, first of all, I sort of assumed that there would be a larger percentage of Blacks and Latinos in the State House than what there is, because especially, at least in Hampden County, the Latino presence makes up a very major, it's a major demographic group here. Do you think that there's a reason why there's not more people from either one of those demographic groups that are in the State House?
Well, first, Mike, let me just say that I am honored to having been elected by my colleagues to serve as the new chairperson of the Black and Latino Caucus. And yes, we do have members from Western Mass, which makes it unique having a chairperson that comes from, because most of the times there always been individuals that have represented more so the Boston area. Especially since Ben Swan, who was a past chairperson of the Black and Latino Caucus. Well, again, when you look at Springfield and you look at Western Mass, you see the big concentration of Black and Latino community members living specifically in cities like Springfield, Holyoke, Massachusetts, growing population, obviously in Chicopee and Westfield. But the concentration of districts, the way it breaks down, I think we've done a pretty good job when you look at the amount of city councilors and council people that are in Holyoke and also in Springfield. And then you have the 3 major state representatives that represent the major part of Springfield, I should say, are Buddy Williams, myself, and Jose Tosado. So I think we're faring pretty well. Okay.
I guess my feeling is that statewide, I'd certainly like to see greater representation because I think it reflects the communities of Massachusetts better.
And that, without a doubt, I think that's one of the efforts that we are trying to see how we can play a role, or more important role, in making sure that there's more diversity throughout the state of Massachusetts.
In terms of the legislature in general, what are your we'll talk about the caucus and some of the things the caucus are doing, but what is your legislative agenda? What's your priorities this session for your district and for the city?
Well, we're looking at, obviously, education. Education is a big part of what the present and the future of Springfield is going to really be able to put your hands around. We look at the education formula. We're trying to make sure that Springfield can get a better shake at the equation of funding. We have a large young people in the city of Springfield. Large segment of those kids in the public school system are from the inner city, come from low-income families. So we're trying to change the equation of how low-income kids are counted as well as funded per school districts. So Springfield would be more advantageous if we can pump in some more funds to the educational formula to meet those demands.
That's the foundation budget that
Correct.
we hear about.
Yes.
And I know in the last session, the House and the Senate weren't able to agree on a foundation budget legislation. Do you have any confidence that in this session, everyone will come together with something that you can give to Governor Baker?
Yeah, I'm more so confident this time, I believe, because I think everybody wants to get to the same goal, is to increase funding, particularly in the area of ELL students, English language learners, as well as low-income students. So how do we get there and how do we pay for it is the big questions. So I think from the Senate side as well as the House side and the governor's side, everybody wants to get to the same goal. So I think having everybody with the same interests plays a more, I think, a feasible opportunity for us to sit down at the table and really make some significant movement in the right direction.
I know that there's been talk of this millionaire's tax, and that the millionaire's tax would conceivably help fund a foundation budget. Is that something that's still in play at this point?
Yes, we just recently had a hearing specifically to the millionaire's tax and how do we word that differently, because last time we lost it at the courts. So I think the wording, the structure of the bill, the legislation would change this time around to hopefully make it not only sustainable, but also be able to keep it, if we pass it at the House and the Senate side, through the courts.
Okay, so that's something that hopefully, if you can get that through and it reaches court approval, then that could be used to finance the foundation budget.
And that is the goal. So it's on education and transportation, and that's where the money will be specifically centered for.
One thing that I know that you have very strong in your background is business development. You were the head of the Latino Chamber of Commerce, and the whole goal there was to encourage small business. Small business is a backbone here in the city of Springfield. Do you see that it is being serviced enough? Do you think that small business is getting what it needs in terms for entrepreneurs to make their dreams come true?
Right. Well, I think one of the main areas of legislation that I have submitted is the micro business set-aside program specifically for inner cities, which is the micro businesses. It's not the small business category. I think we do a fairly good job statewide for small businesses, but small businesses can be anybody that's making $2 million or less. But I'm talking about the micro businesses, the ones that when we walk down Springfield, or you walk down Chelsea, or you walk down Holyoke in downtown areas, those are the mom and pops businesses that we have to play a more significant role as a state to provide assistance, technical assistance, but also be able to provide funding for those programs. So we're trying to encourage a different department that is separate from the small business segment of the state and consider it micro business. And what does that mean? That means that it's $250,000 or less in general sales, and it's under 5 employees. So it's usually husband and wife, brother and brother, sister and sister, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the businesses. Now, why? Because, again, when we walk down, 69% of all businesses in Massachusetts are micro businesses.
Wow.
That's huge. When you go to the inner city, that increases. Now, yes, if I pool all those micro businesses together, they are creating jobs in the inner city. But nobody's looking at them as a job creator. Nobody's looking at them as a taxpayer. But it's also preventing people from utilizing other services that if they didn't have those employment opportunities or those self-employment opportunities, they would be able to take. So 89% of all of the Latino small businesses in Springfield not only have their business here, they own a home here. That's a double bang for the city. And then you see their kids getting a better education and obviously either taking over the business or going into other areas of importance that can help the city of Springfield or the Commonwealth.
I know that one of the issues for a lot of micro businesses is access to capital. So they can get the loans that they need to establish certain things, to do certain things. And I know that in the past that's been very difficult in many instances. Do you think it's still as difficult, or do you think that people are getting them access to the capital that they need?
I think extremely difficult. And I think that when you look at the way institutions work, if you don't change the mindset, you're not going to change the outcome. So they have been able to attempt to reach the communities, particularly diverse communities, particularly the micro businesses, but without great outcomes. So part of the separate entity from small businesses is to create loan-to-grant programs. What does that mean? If I use the same criteria that a small business that goes to a bank to obtain a loan to start or grow their business, I will never be able to provide real services to the micro businesses because they won't qualify.
Right.
Right? So what does a successful business have? They have a legal department, they have a accounting department, they probably have CPAs. That's major business. Well, a small business doesn't have that back-end office. So
Right.
they are the ones that either cook the food in the restaurant and handle the money and do the accounting. So they don't have that. So if we create loan-to-grant programs, we can say, we're going to give you a $25,000 loan. But if you meet these obligations within the next 3 years, and you are successful in providing, having a accountant do all your accounting, pay all your taxes, and hire at least a part-time person, that program will turn into a grant.
Now, is this something that the legislature is working on at this point?
Well, that's part of the, if we can get this different way of thinking, what we want to start having those conversations about. So we've had those conversations with some of the leaders in the small business community throughout the legislation. But again, we can't connect, we can't keep trying to work with micro businesses within the small business mindset. It's like if you have large corporations, you can't have small businesses compete with large businesses.
Right.
It won't succeed.
I think that it's fascinating to me because the phrase that we use all the time is small business.
Right.
And so in my mind, a small business is maybe 30 employees or less, or maybe it is the mom and pop convenience store that's down the street from me. You sort of glom them in your head all together, but in reality, there is a substantial difference. And
Huge difference. And again, they are the job creators of America. When you look at from every president, from George Bush, Barack Obama, to new president, small businesses are the job creators of America. But you're missing the point where micro businesses are the job creators of the inner city.
okay. I know that the caucus has got a whole bunch of legislative goals, and let's start with one that I know that is of interest to you. This is the Community Reinvestment Act. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Since 1968, after the Watts riots, the Community Reinvestment Act under the financial institutions was a mandate that every financial institution will report to the federal government by their catchment area of service what they have reinvested back into the communities.
Okay.
So we knew there was redlining in the past, and due to all those institutional racist models, this money was supposed to rebuild the inner city communities, particularly the diverse communities where the Black and Latino communities mostly lived. So that's a mandate. So when you look at the Community Reinvestment Act now, many people don't even know what it's about. But during the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, that was something that was really upheld to. So the model cities programs in the back, if you look at historically, and some of the community reinvestments that happened in major cities where low-income communities lived, all came from funding that was provided under the mandate of the Community Reinvestment Act. So if you move forward to now, I can walk into a bank and request their Community Reinvestment Act report. The problem is you can walk into some financial institutions now and ask them for the Community Reinvestment Act, And many institutions won't know what that means.
Because they're not doing it?
They're all doing it. It's mandated. But the fact of the matter that somebody in the bank that I walk into is not aware of it means they're not giving it importance.
Got it.
So in the past, you would mandate to find out what the Community Reinvestment Act goals and achievements of a bank was. And they were able to quickly tell you within their catchment area. Now their mandate is basically to report it to the federal government and to the Banking Commission of the state of Massachusetts. What this Community Reinvestment Act will clearly do is not to change the game, is to demand that banks provide to each municipality what their Community Reinvestment Act goals is and what their achievement. So in the city of Springfield, I could walk into City Hall and say, let me find out what the Community Reinvestment Act for Springfield for Bank of so-and-so. It'd be more clear to me than to get a 400-page report that I don't really understand because I'm not a CPA to be able to see if they meet those demands. So we're asking the financial institutions to play a more significant role in reducing the recidivism of poverty, and we think we can do that.
So you're hoping then to make all of this much more transparent and much more easily communicated to people living in a community to know what the banks are doing for them, essentially.
Transparent and local.
Okay. So this is something that's being considered this session in the legislature?
Yeah, I've been filing this bill for the last, my last 2 terms, and I will continue to do that. It's one of our major priorities now because I'm trying to shift some of the mindset of members of the Black and Latino caucus. We need to concentrate on some of the social ills that impact our communities of color, but we also have to look at economic ills that impact our community. And this is one way we can do it, because once we know what if they're doing or not doing in specific municipalities, then we can work with the financial institutions to highlight some of the things that we think would be more beneficial for the inner cities than having somebody from the corporation headquarters that may be in a different state try to implement.
Because, of course, with banking has changed so much from locally operated banks or statewide operated banks to now banks that are across the nation, banks that are coming into an area and buying up other banks. It's much more difficult now to find locally based banks that might have a greater sense of community, a greater sense of community involvement than a bank that's got its headquarters in another state.
Yeah. You had a relationship with your bank many years ago. Right now, you have a bank teller who can't make any decisions. You have a bank manager that basically can't really make any decisions. Some banks do better than others, obviously, and some of our credit unions do actually better than banks. So, you know, we have a strong banking community in the city of Springfield and throughout the state of Massachusetts, obviously. So if we can work with them, because again, they do put money into different programs, but again, if we don't change the mentality, we'll never change the outcome.
Right. Well, that sounds extremely important. In fact, everything, I reviewed the website for the caucus, and everything that you guys are working on, I mean, this is like serious stuff. There's an act to prevent illegal trafficking in gun violence by restricting the number of guns that can be sold to a person in 1 year. We're restricting it to no more than 15. And it's to prevent the bulk purchases of guns that then can go into the wrong hands. It's stuff like that that I think really can help make a difference in urban communities in Massachusetts.
Right. And again, a lot of the urban communities have been stricken because of a lot of gun violence. And there's many ways to attack it, mental health, obviously, but the restrictions, common sense restrictions of guns, I think is essential and important. And it's sad to see the large, or I would say the difference of opinions of how do we get to the same goal. I believe everybody wants to get to the same goal. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe that we need to protect ourselves and have every right so, but I don't think you need, you know, more than 15 guns to do so.
Right. There was another act that was listed on the website about eliminating health disparities. So obviously, there's a lot of concern about healthcare in Massachusetts. We're looked at upon as a national leader, and certainly our healthcare service was the model for the Affordable Care Act. But it's not without some problems and not without certainly funding issues. I think, what was it, 40% of our state budget goes toward healthcare. So are there larger healthcare issues that are facing minority populations in the state?
Yeah. When the outcome of your health is determined by your zip code, we have a problem. So when a kid is born in where I live in 01107 compared to 01118, the outcome of the lifespan of that child extremely different. The outcome of being healthy, that's a huge disparity. So we have to realize that. We have to recognize that. And when you look at it, it comes down to poverty. It comes down to low-income communities not feeling well when it comes to health. It also comes to education, information, and community involvement. So just like community policing, we need to have community health programs. So when we have the Bay State, who has a community health center in the North End and one in the Hill McKnight area, those centers serve a large population. But we have to do a better job in preventing health negative outcomes. So I think the health disparities are clear in Massachusetts. We have been able, through our model programs of providing health care, 97% of everybody resident of Massachusetts has some type of health insurance. We still have a little ways to go. There's some discussions of Medicare for all. There's some discussions of health care for all. Then there's the major discussion, how do we pay for it? And with the turbulent time that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. today, makes it even more difficult. So we have to, and we're looking at legislations now that can look at the cost of medication, working with our pharmaceutical companies, and having legislative authority to be able to regulate, but also review why certain medications are being, or increases in certain medications are happening, and be able to do something if we see that there's an unfair way of doing that.
Excellent. Among the other things that's on your legislative agenda, there was another bill that was to ensure that the workforce on municipal projects actually reflect the residents of the host community. We're sitting right here on the MGM campus. MGM was given a number of goals to meet in terms of construction jobs, in terms of local people, in terms of women, in terms of minorities, in terms of veterans. And they met all those goals. It was pretty impressive that they were able to do that. But clearly, this legislation would try to extend that to other projects to make sure that people living in a community, especially if it's a low-income community, would actually have an option, have a viable application process for jobs there.
Right. Extremely important, and I got to give credit to the local unions here. In my past role with the chamber and MGM, because we were able and successful to establish a residency ordinance that put a criteria with 30% would be local, 20% would be minority, 5% would be women, and 5% would be veterans workforce. And during the construction phase, we were looking at the continued numbers that were presented to us by MGM. So we were significantly happy with the outcomes of what happened there. So again, statewide, how do we leverage the ROI, which is the residency ordinance, and do that for other projects? So whether you're building a bridge or you're building a school or you're building a hospital, how do we make sure that local residents, specifically diverse community residents, are having the same access to those employment opportunities, which are pretty well paid for due to the prevailing wages of Massachusetts. So how do we establish that and how do we expand it? That's what we're working on to do.
Excellent. The other thing that certainly would be welcomed, I know, by municipalities, is that another bill that you guys are working on is a more equitable formula for distributing lottery money, which is known as unrestricted local aid. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that, again, just like the foundation budget, there has to be negotiations about how to establish a formula. So basically, it's far more equal from a city like Springfield to a smaller suburban community in terms of the type of lottery money they're getting.
Right. Yeah, when you look at the formula, some towns don't even have an agent that sells lottery.
Really?
Yeah, some towns don't even have that. So they reap the benefits of cities like Springfield and other cities and towns that have those agents. So, and again, those are small rural areas. We're not fighting against them, but Springfield does fairly well, I gotta say, after really reviewing this in depth, right? More. Springfield does really well with the lottery formula. But some of our other municipalities don't. So we're trying to work as a collective body at the Black and Latino Caucus, because some members, their districts do better, some others don't. So we're trying to see which does better and which don't, but we're looking at every way that we can provide economic opportunities to the inner city. That is the real goal of the full priorities of the Black and Latino Caucus.
Is to provide opportunities that are not
economic
there right now.
Opportunities.
Right.
Economic is the word. Economic. We fail to, when it comes to communities of diversity, we call, or they call us when there's issues of social programs or SNAP programs, and specifically, we want to talk about jobs, home ownership, economic development, business development, and self-employment.
Leveling the playing field for everyone.
Basically so, because it's not only for residents that are here today, but it's the kids of those residents that are here today that will benefit and reap some of those financial benefits.
Excellent. Carlos, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
And folks, thank you for joining us for another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.